When I'm looking at this footage of the seconds before that explosion, there's this sense of impending tension and there are these people and this is just about to happen. I feel the build of the tension and I'm just waiting for this black explosion to happen again. And that's where it takes me every time. I'm Francis Mead. I worked for the UN for 25 years and I'm a videographer. In summer of 2003, I was working for UNICEF. I was reporting and writing articles for the web on the humanitarian situation, like the electricity shortages. I even did a piece about disabled veterans, Iraqi veterans. It was like a compound with trailers surrounding it at the back with barbed wire around it. And then there was a 3-story white and blue building which at one time had been a hotel, but the UN weapons inspectors had used that building for quite a few years. Now, UN weapons inspectors were not popular in Iraq at all because they were seen as being intrusive, so that was a factor. This is a place that wasn't seen very well by Iraqis. So on the day of August 19th, one of the stories I was working on, ironically, was on unexploded munitions in Iraq. So that afternoon, there was a conference on unexploded munitions in Iraq. Naturally, I went there. So first of all, it's pretty unusual to have cameras running when an explosion goes off, very close to the explosion. And I was sitting in the front row next to Alan, this ex-military guy from New Zealand. The thing I remember is looking at this footage is that you've got a normal situation. You've got people sitting in a normally lit room, somebody's just talking about some subject. And these are the last few seconds before the explosion happens. If you look very carefully at the footage, in the last kind of second before the explosion, you start to see the image shaking. And I understand that this was, a precursor, the air pressure coming from the blast that was just about to happen.
In our landmark impact survey in the north, we found that 80.
And I have to say, this is pretty much like it was. The audio is like an immense crash. It's this huge crash. And blackness. It's like you can't. If we were in this room and everything went black and there was a crash, your brain would be suspended for a few seconds. You're kind of caught in this blackness, which I didn't notice at the time. But I think what happens, the blast goes out and throws debris everywhere, and then it kind of sucks it back, and then the light becomes more normal again. There's a sort of grey light. Everything's filled with dust. Yeah, so you got all this. You can see all this dust, and people sort of beginning to react. And I remember that at that moment, as the light comes on and you think, oh, that was an explosion. It sounded like it was inside the building. So there I am, and I'm sitting down looking bewildered. And, one of the things you want to do when you're in that situation is kind of get some order. And I think I dropped my tape recorder on the ground. And I didn't really know what to do. It's like, well, what do you do after an explosion has gone off? I mean, what do you do? And then there's Alan in the moustache. He's shouting. He's shouting, "Stay where you are! Stay where you are!" It was a bloody big explosive. The FBI concluded that it was 2,000 pounds of explosive. It was a suicide truck bomber. A guy had driven a truck down the side of the building and exploded his truck. So there's the bill. That's very familiar to me. That's the front entrance where we stumbled out. There were a lot of very well-trained emergency people there, and they very quickly began to gather bodies, actually, or badly injured people on grass. And I stumbled out and was, looking down at these people, not knowing what to do. I feel bad. I didn't know what to do. And somebody was stirring to looking at me, and I didn't know what to do. So I didn't know. I didn't do anything. I later found things to do, but in that moment, it was very hard. And then, of course, there's several hours of drama to go because, yes, 22 people were killed, but some of those, one or two of those, were still alive in the rubble, and 150 people were injured. And, of course, it was Iraqis and internationals all injured together. We're looking at the flag, it reminds me, well, just the physical horror of it, because there's so many things flying through the air. It's not the direct blast that kills people. A lot of it is glass. You get 1,000 cuts. Other people were killed by bricks falling on them. So you can see that there are holes in the flag, and there's this deadly shower, a blast of objects and glass and metal and brick. There was one Iraqi who was a waiter who came to the door with other people, and he was killed in the doorway. So I remember him. The other aspect of this is just sheer dumb luck. You just happened to be in a place where you weren't killed, and somebody not very far away from you was killed. I mean, obviously this is a watershed moment for the UN. There'd never been such a big attack on a UN civilian operation before. And I don't think the UN quite realized that they were in danger, that it would actually happen. Nobody quite believed. They thought the UN shouldn't be militarized, should be separated from military protection, because how can you operate if you can't integrate and work and intersect with the local population? But sadly, the UN flag didn't provide protection. This was a huge attack. And then it was a watershed moment because this presaged several further major attacks on the UN down the years. For example, in Nigeria, in Algeria, in Afghanistan. I think humanitarian work has become more complicated these days. That's my impression. There's also a lot of criticism of humanitarian work, and it's not effective, or, people don't use the money well. Some of that criticism is fair, but some of it isn't. It's better than not doing it, I'm pretty convinced. In many cases, humanitarian workers are bringing in really vital support that's really needed, or they can help train, or they can bring in other kinds of support. So, despite all the problems, the security and the criticism, I'm still a believer in humanitarian work. You have to do it thoughtfully and be well prepared and well informed, but it's worth it.